in my daughter's room and she's
And
afraid of
we're
bugs.
live. It's Thursday, May 29th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m., and Holly and I have a new homage to Chevy Chase and the old weekend update on Saturday Night Live. Those of you who are old enough to remember will recall that Chevy Chase always used to begin the news. He would be on the phone talking to his girlfriend and not noticing that the camera was on him and live, and then he would say something like, "Oh, gotta go," and hang up and start the news show. And uh, and so we've decided that when we see that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Holly is going to start free associating, and I'm going to annoyedly cut her off with "and we're live." Um, and so, first of all, I want you all to understand that you should not think Holly is a moron who can't see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and know that the show is about
They
to
can
start.
think that for other
And
reasons.
secondly, you should not think that I'm rude for impatiently cutting Holly off and saying, "and we're live,"
They can
because,
think that
folks,
for other reasons.
this is a bit. Um, all right. Second thing, it has come to our attention that since Holly started wearing wired headphones, the cactus's audibility has declined because she keeps holding the cactus up to the screen as though he's going to be better heard. And so we have made a decision that the cactus needs to be Marie Kondoed, held close to her heart where the microphone is, because Holly actually does have a microphone implanted in her heart. And so we're going to hold the cactus close, and we're going to see if he sparks joy. And if he doesn't, we are going to destroy him utterly. But
I
since
didn't. I didn't agree to that.
since we're
This is the
confident,
first I've heard of his possible destruction.
since we're confident that the cactus will spark joy, we will just consider it a daily, a daily ordeal that the cactus has to go through. And yes, you should all remember that the ordeal is, in medieval times is, a trial by some kind of threat, and the cactus every day has to go through the possibility of destruction if he does not spark joy. And that's one of his burdens to carry in life. Um,
Do you want to test it out now?
yeah, let's test it out.
All right.
Um,
So let's. This is a
the
moment of
sun
truth.
is still not
Oh,
shining. The birds actually have gone completely silent and been replaced by the sound of NPR news in the background. Um, but, folks, you are watching Dog
how was
Shirt.
that? Could
It,
everybody hear that?
it was. The cactus survives another day. He sparked joy.
I feel tremendous joy.
Yeah.
So they both get to stay.
Yeah, the cactus, you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is an effing, oh, sorry, Jonathan's here. It is a fucking revolution in morning television. And one of the fucking revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that we invent new revolutionary features almost every day, like Holly free associating when we go live. And another of the revolutionary features is that Jonathan Rauch, who is not a Mormon woman, his Chiron informs me, periodically walks into my office at the Brookings Institution, where we are both senior fellows, and which inexplicably continues to employ both of us. Um,
That is
period,
confusing.
Periodically walks into my office and says, I have an idea. And he proposes an idea, and he says he wants to workshop it with the Greek chorus. And I say, okay, so when are you coming on the show? I have Mike Pesca coming on tomorrow, but you could come on Thursday. And he says, I'm coming on Thursday. And
And he actually shows up, which is a
Being
revolution.
Thursday, he shows
Because a
up.
lot of the people you invite on here don't actually show up.
That's right. Some people don't show up. But Jonathan Rauch, when he says he's going to be here, he's going to be here. He's not a Mormon woman. He is a friend of the show, enemy of the people. And he's got an idea he wants to workshop for a possible article in the Atlantic. He has done some preliminary consultation with legislative authorities. That is to say, he asked Molly Reynolds whether any of this was plausible. And so, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Well, before he starts, are we also going to keep brainstorming the June 14th drag idea while he's here? Just put a pin in that.
We can brainstorm
No,
other
he's
things.
moved on. He's moved on. He's not doing it.
I realize that I am going to be out of town on June 14th. I'm going to be in Wyoming.
Everybody sucks but me.
Everybody sucks but Holly. So, Jonathan, the floor is yours. Welcome back. And we will just lay out your idea and then pose questions, and we will get the hive mind thinking about it.
Thank you. Is there a way for me to put something in chat that everyone can see? Or is it only things that only the two of you can see?
Yeah, so you can go to live stream chat if you click on the chat button and then click on the live stream
everyone. I see.
Then you'll see everybody.
This is a notion for an article to be co-written by the estimable Benjamin Wittes, or should I say the fucking estimable Ben Wittes.
I think if you're going to use estimable, you got to use the full name.
Yeah, all right.
It's very rude to say like the estimable Hall or Hall Fletch. If you're estimable, it's Holly, Berkley, Fletcher. It's Benjamin Wittes.
Yeah, all right. Here's the idea.
I'm going to change your Chiron.
I hate to think what to.
I would like a Mormon wife, by the way. I think they seem very useful around the house. So
I'm just gonna leave that one hanging.
There are coming up two opportunities, or at least one opportunity, for the Democrats to attach riders or attempt to attach riders to bills that President Trump will have to sign. One of them is an extension of the debt limit, which may or may not be included as part of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. We're not sure yet. The second, that one is possible. The one that is certain is a continuing resolution, which will come up in September and October to fund the government. As you will all recall, last time this happened, and I think it was March, Minority Leader Schumer decided not to fight the administration because he did not see a way to get a win out of it. I don't think that's the case anymore. The president's popularity is much lower. It's much clearer what he's doing. I don't think tactically it serves his interest in the way that it did in February and March to shut down the government and fire a whole bunch more random people and make the country even more chaotic. So I think this is the opportunity that Schumer and the other Democrats in Congress were waiting for and did not get the first time around. And that raises the question, what should they demand in order not to filibuster the debt limit and or the continuing resolution? My proposal is that there ought to be a People's Bill of Rights. And this would be a list of items, perhaps 10 items, modeled roughly on the Contract on America, as Bill Clinton called it, the Contract with America, as Newt Gingrich called it, which was a political statement of priorities and goals intended to lay out where the party was coming from and why the party in power was corrupt. So the notion here is what should be on the Democrats' shopping list? What are the things they should ask for? I did a little sketching out in my head of what those things should be. I wound up coming up with 11, not 10, which is fine. But it occurred to me that a good way to do this would be simply to crowdsource it. But I just put in the chat 11 items, areas in which I think Congress could pass stuff that does one of two things or preferably both. So here, oh, Ben is muted.
I don't see it in the chat. I think
I have to hit send.
Yeah, you gotta hit, that's,
So here are the criteria. So folks, this is not screwing around, trolling. This is not about being funny. This is for an actual article, the real stuff. And the criteria are, number one, items on this list should be meritorious. They're things that are actually worth running a political risk in the form of shutting down the government to fix. They should actually make the country stronger and reduce the odds of turning the presidency into a monarchy. The second thing is they should be politically popular. The optics are good so that if the Democrats do shut down the government over this list, that people would say, yeah, the Democrats are right. So the politics need to be good and the substance needs to be good. So when I thought about the things that belong on this list as a starting point, here are the things. I will just tick these off. I will not attempt to go into them all because you'll all have your own list and Ben will have his list. In no particular order, judges have to be protected. It needs to be a crime to threaten them, even if that crime is not enforced under Trump. This needs to be made explicit, and there need to be resources made available to protect judges who are threatened. Number two, his trade authority needs to be whacked way, way back. Number three, his emergency powers more broadly need to be whacked way, way back. Fourth, I don't know what you do about it, but his ability to move money around and ignore appropriations needs to be curtailed. Since it already is curtailed, I'm not sure how you go about this, but it needs to happen somehow. Fifth, you got to do something about the gifts and emoluments. You may have to make it explicit that it is a violation of federal law to accept airplanes and other gifts and emoluments. Six, you need to outlaw, to ban personal lawsuits by the president and other senior federal officials. They should not be able to sue private citizens like the Washington Post or ABC News for money while they are in office and enforcing laws and regulations against those companies. Next, what number are we on? 7. You've got to clearly ban extortion and slush funds like what the administration is doing to law firms, where you go to them and say, nice business you have, we're going to destroy it if you don't drop money in our piggy bank. That should be a felony. 8th, due process for federal grantees so that if a grant is suspended, it is unquestionably clear that due process of some sort is required and you can't just suspend them on a whim. This one also may be existing law, but some of the things on this list can be symbolic. They can be ways to say, and we really mean it. 8th, you got to do something about the president's ability to send people to foreign prisons on whim. 9th, I don't know where we are in this list. Maybe it's 10th. You have to ban commercial trades and stock trades by the president and Congress when they're in office. This is aimed at both cryptocurrency in Congress and cryptocurrency by the president, and insider trading by Congress. And finally, restore biomedical research and PEPFAR because they are popular. So those are the items that come to mind for the People's Bill of Rights. I now yield the floor to the estimable Ben, the estimable Holly, and the estimable Greek Chorus.
Holly, what do you think?
Well, I'm trying the chat's difficult because I'm scrolling back up to see. I'm trying to look at what he posted without success because the chat is a prickly beast. But in general, I think it's a great idea. As has mentioned, a lot of these things are in current law. But I suppose it's worthwhile to sort of foot stomp and, I mean, to me, the key thing, I don't know. See, um, I think to me the key thing in the if in the key sort of macro issue would not um, could not be put in a bill. It would probably require a constitutional amendment, which is that the president has to obey court orders. You know, that's kind of seems to be a macro issue, but I don't. I think wouldn't that require to sort of spell that out more robustly and actually have an enforcement mechanism. I think that's a bigger project than just something that would be in a bill. Um, yeah. I'm looking at. I mean, to me, the other thing, the thing to foot stomp for on a political matter, I think the thing to really focus on at this juncture is all the corruption stuff. And again, a lot of that is already against the law, but spelling that out and maybe going beyond what's already in law would definitely be worthwhile and make them, make them vote against it, basically. Oh, that's the key thing with a lot of this, right, Jonathan, is like you put something, it could already be in the law, but you put something in a bill or like in a rider or an amendment that would come up for a vote, and you basically make the Republicans vote against it. And then you can use that. Isn't that right? Oh, mute.
That's right. Or you get some of them to vote for it, and you actually get these things enacted into law, and they could make a difference.
And you make Trump veto it, right?
And soon, and then he shuts down the government. That's right. This is your only leverage point. This
Could
calendar.
you? I mean, what about this whole international the effing around with the student visas and like revoking visas just on whims and rounding up foreign students? Is that something that could be put in there, or is that really clearly under the Secretary of State's legal purview?
I think Congress can do a lot of things if it wants to, including due process for visa denial. I don't know.
Yeah, Congress could repeal the statute that authorizes him to do that. So I have a highly conceptual question for you um, that I've been thinking about since we had this conversation in the office. It seems to me that there are two broad things going on in this list. One is Congress spending money, where its authority is essentially plenary. If it wants to spend money on biomedical research and PEPFAR, it can do it. Period, full stop. There may be a problem with getting the executive branch to spend some of the money, see impoundment question, but there is no question that Congress has the authority to spend money. And then there are separate questions where you're trying to restrict, you know, presidential action somehow, not by dint of spending money or refusing to spend money, hold that thought, but by dint of passing laws, right? Some of those laws are going to be redundant of existing laws, see the gratuities statutes. Some of those laws are not going to be redundant, they're new restrictions. But they raise this question of, will the executive branch follow them? It seems to me where you're strongest here is where you can say you must spend money on X, you cannot spend money on Y, no dollar. This is how Congress finally ended the Vietnam War, right? You won't spend any more money on this. And I wonder if, in the context of a budget appropriations bill, it is worth, as a matter of discipline, focusing entirely on spending stuff so that you're at the height of congressional power. And so, for example, the way to attack the Qatari plane is no federal money, no, not $1 shall be spent refurbishing that plane. Um, uh, And by the way, if you want to, if or no money can be spent receiving a plane, but from foreign, from foreign Emirates. Um,
Although then won't they just give the plane then directly to the Trump organization?
yeah, and if Trump wants to spend $1 billion refurbishing it,
Does it
as
really need that? I mean, I know for security reasons, but if he's not going to use it for, secure comms, like if he's just going to fly around in it after his presidency or whatever, does it need $1 billion? Is it
so
going to require?
I don't know. My point isn't to adjudicate any of the points here, or
Sorry.
like I think all of them would require some serious legislative craftsmanship to figure out how to make them work most effectively. But I wonder if rather than you know um, you know like if framing them in appropriations terms is most effective. Now, the exception to that would have to be um, restricting emergency powers and trade authority, because those are, and by the way, you should some immigration stuff, because these are areas where Congress has just given huge power to the president, and the start is to take it back. But I wonder if like we should think carefully about which of these can be framed as new restrictions, which of these can be framed as restrictions on spending money, and which of them can be framed as mandatory spending. For example, you could restore a lot of USAID through mandatory spending requirements.
Um, a lot of these could be done that way. It's an interesting thought. Can we just very quickly flip through them and see?
Sure.
Protect
You
judges,
cannot protect judges.
you can do that through an appropriation.
I'm not sure you can.
Um,
You can appropriate money for the protection of judges, but um, how do you appropriate money? How do you require that the executive protect
Is
judges?
this like additional security for judges or like what?
yeah, it's security. I also think Congress is easily within its power, although it's not an appropriations power, to criminalize threats to federal judges.
What if you did it this way? What if you said the fundamental problem right now is not threats to federal judges, it's the president not following orders of federal judges? And what if you said, and I would have to think about how to craft this, that you may not spend a single dollar to carry out any federal action that that a federal court has ruled to be unlawful, absent intervening action by some appellate body. In other words, if you're proposing to do X and court over here says you can't do X, it's illegal, um, you can't spend money to do it.
So there must be ways to fit a lot of these into appropriations boxes. I'm wondering now if the first question isn't what our priorities are, what we should be telling Democrats to want. Um,
Well, I would say protecting judicial authority following court orders is figuring out mechanisms to protect judicial authority.
Yeah, so how do you do that? Was that require I mean, is that you tell me because I'm not a legal person. Does that require a constitutional change
I
or
don't
what
think
else could be
so.
put
I mean,
into
it's
the law?
already con law that the judges, I mean, since, Marbury versus Madison, it
Okay,
is
but an
emphatically the
enforcement.
province of the judicial department. Yeah, but the thing about enforcement is that enforcement is by its nature a creature of the executive branch.
Yeah, so what do you do? What's the solution then?
Well, I think the solution is to defund actions that don't comply with the
Okay, I
law.
see. I see. Yeah.
Um, That's why I think the substance and the mechanisms here, if you want to do this in a sophisticated way, the substance and the mechanisms are kind of interrelated.
Well, and also, sorry, one more thing. Defunding, doesn't that, the funding thing, doesn't that also require, can't OMB just like grab money from wherever and do whatever it wants? Isn't that one of the problems? For one thing. But then my second issue is I'm correcting my own thinking in that I think what Jonathan is envisioning is I think we're getting maybe ahead of ourselves, and this is a symbolic gesture to get something on record and to get Republicans to either vote for or against.
Yeah,
Is
but
that
what
right?
if we don't think about it as a symbolic gesture? What if we identify the 10 or so things that A, we think are good policy? We actually believe are responsive to the moment, and B, that we have a mechanism to prevent. So, for example, the president doing shitty things with pardons, yeah, I think it is responsive to the moment. I'd love to do something about it, but we can't because the president has the pardon power is super, super broad. So it's not going to realistically show up on this list unless you want to be purely symbolic. But I think that the discipline of doing this piece right would be to identify 10 or 12 things that you actually can um, get done and you have a mechanism to influence.
So, assuming that's a framework, I'm not completely convinced that there aren't other things that are not completely within Congress's plenary power that the courts would uphold. Um, but assuming that that's the framework that we're using, should we get down to brass tacks?
Sure.
Okay.
But let's say I agree with you that I wouldn't say protecting judges because judges actually there are some threats to judges, but really judges are not intimidated right now. They're emboldened and they're doing, particularly district judges, really good work. I found myself really criticizing a district judge yesterday, Richard Leon, but it was for using too many exclamation marks and including a gumbo recipe in an opinion that's correct. You know, and John Bates, that opinion is spectacular. This is what the federal judiciary is supposed to look like. And so I'm not really afraid of but I am afraid about compliance. And so figuring out how to strengthen the compliance mechanisms associated with the courts strikes me as a very high priority. The
Okay.
next two items, trade authority and emergency powers, these are easy because these are entirely delegated. The actual constitutionally, the authority to issue tariffs is a congressional power. Congress delegated it to the president, and what Congress giveth, Congress can taketh away. I just added a th to Congress. Um, you know, but how did ancient peoples say Congress giveth? That's hard to say. Um, the
I
emergency
think they
powers are
said Congress giveth.
Congress giveth. Yeah.
They lift.
It's like biggest dicketh. Um, um, yeah. Ditto the emergency powers. There's all these statutes that give the president the authority to declare a national emergency and do X. And by the way, can we throw in there repeal the fucking Alien Enemies Act? It was a abomination in the sight of God when John Adams bit his lip and signed it.
It's like
And
still is embarrassing for him. In
yeah,
fact, it would help John
So
Adams
I
to repeal it.
I initially had that on here. Doesn't, however, that violate your rule that we should keep this to clearly sort of appropriations of type
well, I would
thing?
say clearly think Congress that things that Congress unambiguously has the authority to do.
Well,
Well,
It,
you could defund the enforcement of the alien. I mean, isn't that kind of what you're
yes, you
saying?
could do it that way, but you could also, it's just as easy to strip the thing out of the federal code. You know, so like the things that I think are going to be tough in this are things like, lawsuits and and there are some that are going to be hard to craft, but emergency powers and trade authority, these are delegated congressional power. Take the authority away.
Yeah, so I'm going through and putting asterisks next to ones that are easy. And so far, those include Trade Authority, Emergency Powers, Repeal Alien Enemies Act. Okay, the next thing on my list is, can you do anything about his ignoring appropriations? I don't know how you do that in an appropriations bill. Um,
I
because,
do.
okay, how do you do that?
Okay. So, uh, full disclosure, I am about to discuss a matter about which my uh, household has a personal interest. Um, but I'm going to talk entirely based on the public record. And so nothing that I'm going to say should in any way be attributed to E.J. Wittes or any other member of the Wittes household. Let's just, particularly one member of the Wittes household who might or might not run an organization funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. There are two types of these appropriations battles where people are claiming that there have been impoundments. One is the hard cases, um, where Congress says, State Department, spend money on good things overseas, women's issues, minority rights, disease, um, and the executive branch in response sets up a grants program. Now, the program, it may say spend a certain amount on X disease, but the design of the program is left to the executive branch. So, what happened in the USAID and uh, funding freeze, grants freeze, is that the president said, terminate all these grants. And the actual grants are a matter of executive policy and grants writing. What's a matter of appropriation is spend a certain amount of money on, you know, democracy overseas or, you know, women's empowerment, right? There's another kind, and so there, Congress has effectively told the executive branch to spend a certain money, but given it a lot of authority to decide how to spend the money. This turns out to suck.
That's the
Because
technical term.
that's the technical term in appropriations law. Because the president comes in and says, I don't wanna. And maybe you have an argument down the road that he's impounded money by not spending it on women's empowerment overseas at all. But you can't say the women's empowerment overseas organization that, is funded entirely by grants from this program has a line item in the budget that says you have to give it a certain amount of money. Well, there's another model, and the model is the National Endowment for Democracy. And in the case of the National Endowment for Democracy, Congress actually wrote into statute, and you're going to give the National Endowment for Democracy this amount of money. And so, unlike all these other organizations, when the National Endowment for Democracy sued and said, this is a goddamn impoundment, the executive branch folded right away and gave them their money. And that's why the Ned is still in business. And so the lesson I take from this is move the grants process as much as possible to Congress. And let Congress study last year's, study the grants that were canceled last year and write into statute the ones that it didn't want to be canceled, much the way you're describing biomedical research and PEPFAR.
Does this
And
apply
don't
to
give the,
USAID as well?
yeah, you could fund, now you'd have to figure out how, because you don't want Congress to be a grants making agency.
I mean, that would use up an enormous amount of their time.
Yes, and it would also create real
Yes,
opportunities for
for
pork.
yeah.
Um, but you do want, and that's why you traditionally do this by delegation, not by, people coming to Congress and asking for money. But if the executive branch is not going to play fair with these grants processes, Congress can claw back some of that authority and saying, you must spend a certain amount of money. It's painful to even say this, to give AIDS drugs to people in Africa, right? You must give that money, and you can only give that money through the following 36 organizations who have a pre-existing history of PEPFAR, successful PEPFAR, right? You must spend a certain amount of money on women's empowerment in the Middle East. And here are the organizations, public and private, that you can spend that money through. Congressional specificity here could go a very long way to clarifying that these are actually impoundments if you don't do it. And that would give those organizations the ability to walk into court like the NED did. And the NED, there are, again, 4 organizations that are the NED children, one of which is run by my wife, that still exist today
Is
because.
USIP run by the Net?
What's that?
Institute of Peace?
No,
Oh,
it is no.
okay.
The 4 NED children are the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican
Right.
Institute, the Solidarity Center, and an organization called SIPE, which is affiliated with the Chamber of Commerce. And these 4 organizations are children of the NED, and they still exist because the NED has a specific line item in the budget. And so the lesson I take from that is, Congress, if you want to protect these programs, write them as specifically as possible into the budget. And yes, I'm aware that when you say that, you're also saying write into the budget all these, these pork programs. And so we need to be thoughtful and disciplined about how to encourage one without encouraging the other. But that's the answer to the appropriations question, is congressional specificity.
That strikes me as awfully complicated for messaging purposes. And
Yes.
that if for messaging purposes, going back to my item here at the bottom, restore biomedical research and PEPFAR, what you kind of have to do is pick the most popular things, the things everyone loves, and say restore those. Um, and
What if you did it? What if you did it this way? You had a prefatory language that says we are restoring um, PEPFAR, all the child cancer research stuff, and
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's research. You list the popular stuff up front in a kind of prefatory, and and you know, and thousands of other worthy grants terminated by the administration with no process and no consideration, and the rest is just implementing language, just but you create the upfront thing as a prefatory, um, so that people will understand it as restoring PEPFAR, restoring thing, and other stuff. And then you include, it's going to be thousands of pages. It's the
yes,
volume of,
you don't like the optics of thousands of pages for a bill like this. This has to look more like Gingrich's contract with America. That
Well, the
said,
contract with America was thousands of pages. I mean, it's just the bullet point summary of it was
oh, I see.
10 bullet points.
I mean,
So,
like that's every bill, right? There's like a messaging, and then the actual nobody reads, nobody wants, very few people actually read the legislation, right?
well, so I'm going to mark that one as not a no-brainer, doable but complicated.
Yes.
Um, and something to consider is the point of restoring particular areas here is to embarrass the Republicans as much as anything else. Let's move on to, can you do anything about the gifts and the bribes?
Okay, that's really hard. Um, Let me try to think through. So, first of all, the gifts are already illegal under the federal gratuities statute, and I wrote some detail about this a couple weeks ago in my column, and um, I um, I don't know. I mean, you could pass it again, and you could say, no, no, we really mean it. I'm not sure. You could also up the penalties. Um, and you could say, right now it's a 2 year felony. You could make it a 10-year felony. I'm not a big fan of excessive prison sentences myself, but there's some messaging capacity in that.
What
Um,
about, could you designate penalty? Could you designate sort of some facilitation role being also illegal, so that these underlings, so like the president, thank you Supreme Court, and
yeah, this
didn't
does
just
not affect the president, it gives the givers. But
okay, but if they're foreign,
well, so here is um, I had lunch yesterday with a genuine expert in criminal law, like, which is something that I say very rarely, but this is one of the 3 or 4 people I know who knows the most criminal law. And I think we had a conversation about, it was more about the shakedowns of law firms, um, but they're closely related in that in both cases you have these underlings who are going and kind of soliciting gifts. And the difference between soliciting gifts and soliciting compliance is the difference between a conspiracy to uh, solicit gratuities and give gratuities, and and soliciting compliance, right, which is the shakedown side. Um, I think I can't answer this question sitting here, but I think some study of the question, how do you maximize the availability of the criminal law to forbid, again, you're not going to get to the president himself with this because of the Supreme Court, but everybody who's working for him on this, on his side, and everybody who's giving gifts on the other side. And by giving gifts, I also mean if you're a law firm that's, being shaken down, you should know that, like, you're not simply a victim for extortion purposes, that you may have serious liability under the bribery regimes for that. So I think we need to study, like, what the Hobbs Act really looks like here, how it interacts with the gratuities statute, um, uh, but and also the conspiracy statutes, because the conspiracy statutes is how you're going to get to all these underlings. But I don't know the answer to the question of, like, I can't write you a memo right now that says, here's how you use the existing statutes and here's how you would need to change them to maximize their availability. But somebody should commission that study.
Well, you might also, per your previous idea, you might also just be able to say, no dollars shall be spent soliciting, receiving, refurbishing, or negotiating any gift to the president or some slush fund of the president's creation.
Yes, you can definitely use, and you could have like 10 different votes for 10 different, crypto schemes, uh, jets. You could, if you studied each and every outrage, you could force a lot of different votes that were like, the government shall spend no money receiving a Qatari jet. The government shall spend no money, um, refurbishing. The government shall, etc. Right? You could figure out the government shall spend no money implementing uh, uh, any policy advocated by people who've given more than X amount in Trump coin, right? Like you could do a lot of mischief if you had a serious appropriations person thinking about how to write this stuff.
Well, something else to think about is when the president shakes down law firms to contribute pro bono work to essentially his slush fund. That's illegal too, right? Because it's circumventing the appropriations process. Isn't that what the whole Oliver North scandal was about in the 1980s? That, Reagan went out and raised money for a slush fund for the Contras, circumventing the whatever. What was the act? Anyway, they
The
circumvented
Boland
the
Amendment.
Boland Amendment. Right. So that's not legal
Speaking of
either, right?
things stored way in the back of my head that you pull out.
That's a large room. What is behind you, Ben? You have a large storage room in the
It's
back of your
just
head.
it's actually just a USB port, and
I
there's a
see.
little
That would explain
plug
a
there.
lot.
Um, yeah, the Boland Amendment. I'd forgotten about that one. Um, so look, you'd got have to talk to somebody who really knows appropriations, but I think the answer is that it entirely depends how the thing is structured. So if you have the president assigning law firms that he has on a leash to do work that normally the Justice Department would do, because otherwise he's going to fuck them up real bad with a whip. Um, I can't imagine that's legal. Um, but I'm not sure I quite understand. I can't point you to chapter and verse on why it's not. It may be that nobody's ever made it illegal because nobody noticed that it could possibly happen. Um,
Well, I,
if
I
what
don't know either, but my recollection of the 80s, when you were in high school, but I was actually covering it, was that it is a violation of law for president to circumvent the appropriations process by using his authority to go out and raise slush funds. He has to work with money that Congress has appropriated.
Right, so the theory, and now you're getting into stuff that I, alas, do know. The theory of the Walsh prosecutors is that there was a conspiracy to violate the Boland Amendment, which is what you're describing. And this was always controversial because can you have a conspiracy to violate an appropriations law, basically? And, normally conspiracies are conspiracies to violate a criminal statute. And so, look, I think could you pass law that restricted this? Yes. Is there existing law that restricts it? I don't really know.
So maybe what belongs on this list is for Congress. I think this also falls well within its appropriations power of saying no slush funds. President will spend no money not appropriated by Congress. He will not raise or spend money that we don't appropriate.
And but of course it's got to exempt campaign finance. What about his business? It can't, now I'm not saying he should be allowed to have a
I
business.
mean, that should be another whole law, but I don't know if that's it.
Exactly.
Like
And you get it.
there should be a whole list of laws like dictate like the president has to divest, like put that into law. The
Well,
tax returns, the
and
whole thing.
some of that is in Bob Bauer and Jack Goldsmith's book from the first published, I want to note, by Lawfare. There's a whole section of this that sketches out in great detail, not sketch, details, what you can and can't do in the realm of requiring disclosures, requiring divestment, requiring blind trusts. And so, maybe the answer is you got to go big on that. Your assets have to be in a blind trust. They have to be publicly disclosed, and
No Bitcoin, no meme
and
coin.
no slush funds, right? Um, but that's a complicated piece of
Yeah.
legislation.
I mean, for the purposes here, I mean, I don't know. I feel like they would there is a decision to I realize you could do something both symbolic slash messaging and with real teeth, but I do think you have to sort of pick and choose a little bit if you're on the real teeth at this juncture. I to me at this juncture, there's a few things that I feel like you know must be spelled out of like the whole. I mean, we can't be sending people without due process into
Well, let's talk about the foreign prisons thing, because I think that's an area where Congress has plenary power, and um, you cannot. How about this? No, the executive branch may not spend any money to send any uh, to deport any person outside of the context, the strictures of the Immigration and Naturalization Act. Number one. So that's another way of saying no dice on the uh, um, no dice on the Alien Enemies Act. Number two, you cannot send uh, a any person under any law to detention in a foreign country without A, due process, and B, without known process for the person in that country. In other words, if you're going to deport somebody to El Salvador to detention in El Salvador, there has to be criminal process for them in El Salvador. I think that would shut it down.
And that's clearly within plenary authority to say you can't spend a dollar doing that, correct?
Yes, at its two broad authorities. Remember, Congress has control over the border too. Immigration is a province of Congress, not the president.
So I'm
Immigration
putting a star
enforcement.
next to that one as one of the fairly straightforward
It's
ones.
pretty straightforward. Congress has the power to make the substantive law, and Congress has the power to fund the activity that it does and doesn't want to fund.
So far, I'm going to put this in the chat. But so far, if I count correctly, which I probably don't, I think we have 4 items that are pretty straightforward. I just called it foreign prisons. There was another that they could defund too, right? Which one was it? I'll have to go back and look.
I don't have the full list in front of me.
Wasn't it the whole
Oh, gifts. You can't receive.
the appropriate like making the impoundments issue, applying that to more spending, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you can make that stuff more specific. The more specific you make it, the harder
Yeah,
it is.
I put that in the more complicated category. Not that it's a bad
Okay.
idea. What did
Yeah,
we
yeah,
say
yeah, I
about
agree.
the gifts one, the gifts and the bribes and the slush funds? We decided that one's pretty difficult.
Um, well, Congress has a lot of authority. It's not clear how much they've already criminalized. It's not clear, I would have to spend a lot of
Okay.
time studying it to
Yeah,
figure
spend a
out how
lot of
much
time
more they can
studying
do.
means I won't just doesn't mean we don't call for it. It means it's not as easy as these four that I've put down there. Due process for federal grantees was on my list, and that says that government can't yank your contracts or your money or your grant without some kind of due process. Now that's the law already, right? But
Yeah,
but
but
you'd want to
so
say they
again, this
can't
is,
spend any money doing it.
well, yeah, this is a tough one, I think. So,
I know there's so much that is already the law that they're
well, because
just
it is already the law. You
yeah.
get due process. You can challenge
Yeah, I
it,
know. That's what I'm saying.
but you
So
can challenge it in retrospect.
that's what I'm saying. Like macro level, I feel like there's the big issue is like judicial enforcement of judicial.
Right, but also,
The courts are too
so
slow is the
The
problem.
courts are too slow. Yeah, that's the bottom line. By the way, that's another whole thing I wanted to talk to you about another time, Ben, is like why the courts like are so tight, thinly slicing all these cases. It's like a ping pong game and it's enraging me, but that's
that's the
another
way
whole
they
issue.
work. Um, so, yeah, I would say that is a hard one because you don't want to give every federal defense contractor, every Beltway bandit, the ability to cheat and steal on a federal grant, run up big stuff, and then when the government finally gets fed up and tries to cancel the grant, to be able prospectively to challenge that. That would be like the biggest gift you could give Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and you know, um, and the problem here is that the government needs flexibility in, and that's what I would say is maybe the answer is to focus on the specific grants that were canceled, as in laundry listing. Like this is again goes against your idea of big principles, but the way to solve that problem is to say this 100,000 grants that were canceled, we Congress think that's bullshit, and we're making those people whole, but we're not doing anything prospectively. Um, I don't know. Again, you'd want like a team of federal contracting people to think about this.
Yes, that would have to go in the difficult category. So,
We've got 3 minutes left, Jonathan.
well, I think we're making some headway.
I do too.
I think we've got at least four items that are pretty straightforward. Are there any areas on my list, I will repost it if it's helpful, that just aren't that important, that aren't worth the trouble? Here's my latest version.
My little pet project is probably not, there's probably no solution, and that is like the security clearances and just basically the president being able to give everybody security clearances that he wants to. But that's congressional oversight. Although in the executive branch, there's a lot of people he just gives security clearances to, such as Jared Kushner. But I don't know. To me, there's like, is there not a way to make sure that like massive counterintelligence risk, people who are dangerous to the national security of the United States, do not get access to classified material? But that would include the
No,
president.
there is
So
no. Yes, you can get a different president.
yes,
Um,
it all comes. So many of these things come back down to the voters. Also, congressional oversight, which is again the voters. Um, the voters are really angering me right now, and there's no solution for that because you can't have democracy without the voters. So
Look, if you could get 3 or 4 of these things done, you'd make a huge contribution. I don't have a problem with this list. I think the challenge, the difference between an article that presents a set of ideas and an article that really gives an agenda is thinking about these in at the level of how would you actually do it? What is a piece of not the details of legislative language, but a single meaty paragraph that says, hey, you know, what does a clawback actually look like here? And I think it's really doable, and I would love to work with you on it.
Before we go, Jonathan, I'm going to pass you the advanced copy of my book through the computer screen. You
Oh
just
my,
grab that.
what's the
Yeah, no, I,
subtitle?
I want to, I want to, I
Show
want
me
to
the
give it to
subtitle.
you. Ben has an e-copy. It's
I will send
Unmasking
you
the
the
Myths of
e-copy.
White Evangelicalism.
Oh
Ben
gosh.
can send you the e-copy, but if you want a physical copy, I have those for you. I can maybe drop it by Brookings or something.
No, I'd rather have the e-copy because I'm out of
Oh,
shelf space.
perfect.
Who's the publisher and when is the pub day?
It's broadleaf and it comes out in August. So,
Yeah, Holly, you know this about Holly, right? That Holly grew up as a missionary kid in Kenya.
I, I, well, I knew that Holly grew up as an evangelical, but not that she grew up as a missionary kid in Kenya. Did you
that's
have to
right.
clear this book with the CIA?
Well, I did, but they weren't interested in it because it's completely unrelated. So it's unrelated. But anyway, this will be a nice anecdote to your nice notions of Christians. So
Uh,
On that cheerful note, Holly, Berkley, Fletcher, great to see you this morning. Jonathan Rauch, this is a great idea, and I think it's going to be a fun project for us to work on. Uh, and Greek Chorus, thank you for all your suggestions. And we're going to be back tomorrow. I have no idea who the hosts are going to be. I have no idea who the guest is going to be, though we got some really cool guests coming up. And but I'll be there, and I suspect you will too.